For 5 years, I tuned the risk engine that protects your family's bank from fraud. I asked the chairman's son. And now you're firing me because I make you feel old. This conversation is over, Trevor said. I smiled, a slow, difficult tightening of my lips. You have 10 minutes before every alert stops flagging. Tell your father I said good luck. The engine had been my life, a consuming 9-year project built in coffee, stained code, and sleepless nights. It was a symphony of paranoia, and I was its ghost composer. I had tuned that thing like a damn violin, adjusting the parameters until it could flag card scams before they were charged, phishing sites before customers clicked, and internal transfers that simply didn't smell right. It was better than any human team, smarter than any consultant. It didn't need a plaque or a bonus or a thank you. It just needed to sing. My work kept the bank alive, running in the shadows while the executive suite worried about ergonomic chairs and quarterly earnings. I was content being the ghost composer. Ghosts, after all, didn't have to navigate the exhausting politics of modern finance. I just needed the system to work. Then Trevor Langston rolled in. He looked like a walking LinkedIn post, with tight pants, teeth whiter than white, and enough startup jargon to choke a Tesla. He was the new acting chairman, a title that really just meant his daddy had died, and now Trevor got to play boss while the ink was still drying on the will. He had an immediate, aggressive need to prove his worth through visible change. What set Trevor off, I think, was that no one clapped when he replaced the espresso machine with a newer, chrome model. He wanted fireworks, applause. I gave him a report on anomalous international wire attempts in the second quarter. It was dense, 30 pages of complex logistics and data flows. He handled the printout like it was a bucket of mold. He didn't read past the first summary page, just tapped the paper with a manicured finger and smirked. This is dense, Nicholas. I looked him straight in his bright, empty eyes. Fraud tends to be that way, Trevor. He didn't like that. He saw my precision as a personal affront to his desire for simplicity. I could smell the coming corporate weather change, the inevitable shuffling, the performance reviews, the new titles with no meaning. HR started scheduling engagement chats. I started getting copied only as a lower-tier recipient on threads I used to lead. It was the kind of petty sabotage that made you laugh and vomit at the same time. But I didn't flinch. They could change the chairs in the room. I ran the air they breathed. My engine still worked. My meticulous work was its own shield, or so I thought. Trevor's first true power move was bringing in external consultants, a team that showed up in matching disrupt tech vests. They moved through the halls with a self-important swagger, asking questions that showed they knew nothing about how real security worked. One of them, a man in a sockless loafer and a blazer, asked me point blank in the middle of a hallway, "So, where's the dashboard that shows what your system is doing in real time?" I raised one eyebrow, refusing to give him an easy answer. If you could see it in real time, I told him, so could the fraudsters. Its power is in its obscurity. He blinked, looking lost like a frog in traffic. Trevor, walking by, tossed out a forced chuckle. "Nicholas is old school," he said, injecting a subtle dismissal into my very name. "He likes code more than clarity." I wanted to respond that I liked solvency more than clarity, but I just nodded and let him have his jab. I let him think he understood what was happening, because I knew something he didn't. The system wasn't just old school. It was alive, it learned, and it didn't like being mocked. The tension escalated over the next few days. I was deliberately excluded from meetings I should have led. Trevor and his acolytes met in conference rooms with the blinds drawn, whispering about agile workflows and disruption. I even noticed my access logs had suddenly become restricted. My name was stripped from the admin list entirely. They weren't modernizing, they were gutting, and they thought I wouldn't notice. The old guard started disappearing like it was a magic trick. Janice from compliance gone. Roy from systems integration vanished. No goodbye cake. Just nervous smiles and cardboard boxes. Trevor didn't want guardians who understood the hidden complexities of the building. He wanted cheerleaders who would nod at his PowerPoint presentations. Then came the meeting that sealed it. I walked into conference room C, and there was one chair left empty intentionally, the one where I usually sat. Trevor was flanked by two smug fintech acolytes. He clicked to a slide that simply read Legacy Eller NAQ Agility. The slash through the equal sign made my teeth hurt. Take Nicholas's fraud engine, he said, pausing for theatrical effect. It's brilliant, but it's dense, obscure, a black box. We need visibility and speed in AI. I picked up my pen and clicked it once, just once. The sound echoed in the silence. That was the only emotional reaction I allowed myself. When he finished his pitch, I slid a printout across the table. Page 3, I said quietly. That black box you're replacing caught 137 credential stuffing attacks in the last quarter alone. Sentinel Byte, the name of their new cloud vendor, flagged too. Both were false positives. Trevor managed to keep the smirk plastered to his face. This isn't about what worked in 2018, he argued, leaning back with supreme smugness. It's about what scales. This is about culture and agility. I stared at him like he was a raccoon in a business suit. He wanted obedience, not security. He wanted to build a flashy castle, not guard the vault. That afternoon, the final blow landed an HR ping. Can you document your current risk workflows, pipeline logic, and system access map just for redundancy? Totally standard. Standard my ass. They had the documentation, but they wanted a fresh copy, one they could sanitize, dissect, and dumb down for their cloud toy. So I gave them what they asked for. I documented everything, a cascade of variables and protocols. But I left out one tiny, crucial element, one line of code buried 17 layers deep: the heartbeat protocol. If someone touched the wrong file, or if someone tried to perform an override without the correct dual key, nothing would break. It would just stop listening. The silence would be invisible, just like me. My forced departure came the next Friday. The meeting, code-named Strategic Horizon Session, was a corporate massacre. Trevor, wearing a blazer that made him look like a magician at a gender reveal party, launched into his buzzword bingo. Then he paused, looked right at me, and with a charming grin, he said, "You know, Nicholas, I think, damn, he makes me feel old." Laughter, forced and uneasy, rippled through the funeral quiet room. He clicked to the next slide. Departmental streamlining risk tech redundancy. My name wasn't on the slide, but everyone knew. He called it a transition plan. What he meant was, Nicholas is done. I didn't argue, I didn't beg. I stood up, unplugged my laptop, and the scrape of the chair on the carpet was the loudest, most meaningful sound in the room. Trevor looked smug. He expected tears or shouting. Instead, I gave him that small, cold smile, the one you give right before pushing the big red button. I delivered the line I had rehearsed for years in the back of my mind, the one that proved he hadn't won anything at all. For 5 years, I tuned the risk engine that protects your family's bank from fraud. I asked the chairman's son. And now you're firing me because I make you feel old. Trevor's confident posture melted into confusion. This conversation is over, he said. I smiled. You have 10 minutes before every alert stops flagging. Tell your father I said good luck. Then I walked out. No one followed. No one breathed. I had given him the plumbing, but I hadn't given him the pulse. The system was now autonomous. If he failed to complete the override, and I knew he would, the engine would go quiet. The silence was mine, and it would be deafening. After months of bureaucratic sabotage, the inevitable meeting arrived, but by then, I was already prepared for war. The final humiliation was swift, delivered in the hushed tones of a man who believed jargon was a suitable substitute for competence. Trevor stood before the bank's remaining executives and the confused, stone-faced widow of the late chairman. The room was cold, lit by the harsh, futuristic glow of his presentation screen. He clicked to the Vision 2026 slide deck, which was less a vision and more a manifesto for technical suicide. His plan was ambitious, entirely untested, and perfectly. Trevor replace all legacy systems, including my risk engine, with the cloud-based Sentinel Byte AI within 90 days. No source code review, no parallel testing, just bold fonts and bullshit. I sat at the back, arms folded, a silent judge. Trevor spoke about agility, explainability, and democratizing data. Every word a hammer blow against the careful, necessary obscurity of my system. When the chairman's widow, a sharp woman named Mrs. Hawthorne, finally spoke, her voice sliced through the corporate fog. "Does that include Nicholas's system?" she asked. Trevor laughed, a short, patronizing sound. "Especially Nicholas's system, Mrs. Hawthorne. While admirable in its time, it's a black box. It's dense, it slows us, we need visibility and speed." He didn't look at me, but he didn't have to. The shame of being called dense and obscure was profound, a direct attack on my intellectual worth. He was replacing my masterpiece with a colorful dashboard. He wasn't solving a problem, he was solving a perception issue, and I was the perception he hated. I picked up my last defense, the counter metrics report I'd prepared, showing the gross inadequacy of the Sentinel Byte pilot in comparison to my engine. This isn't about 2018, I stated, my voice low but carrying. It's about mathematics. Sentinel Byte module flagged 2 cases last month. My system flagged 137. I'm providing superior security. Trevor managed to keep the smirk plastered to his face, pulling the chair closer to his chest. It's about what scales, Nicholas. This is about culture and agility. We can't have systems that require a single person to understand them. We are moving forward. The implication was clear. I was the anchor. I was the relic. The insult was profound, not just to the code, but to the 5 years of my life I had poured into its defense. Later that afternoon, the confirmation landed, the HR ping. Can you document your current risk workflows, pipeline logic, and system access map just for redundancy? Totally standard. It was the bureaucratic equivalent of asking for the keys to the kingdom while pointing a gun at the prince. They wanted to dissect my work, simplify the complex security layers for their new cloud vendor, and then toss the original architect aside. I didn't hesitate. I complied, giving them exactly what they asked for. I spent hours meticulously mapping the plumbing of the risk engine, the inputs, the outputs, the standard operating procedure. I provided the structure, the skeleton, every necessary variable, except for the soul, buried 17 layers deep under a decoy protocol, was the heartbeat protocol. This logic gate was tied to the authorization handshake. If a handler attempted an override or a takeover without completing the correct dual key authentication, the system wouldn't crash. That would be too visible. Instead, it would simply stop communicating with the outside world. No alerts, no flags, no outbound pings to insurance or law enforcement. It would be functionally silent. I had written this protocol 9 years ago, a contingency plan for a scenario I had hoped I would never face: institutional betrayal. It was the ultimate failsafe, a final act of self-preservation for the engine itself. I realized then that my fear of irrelevance was forcing me to finally claim ownership of my worth, not through applause, but through tactical destruction. That evening, I logged in one last time. I initiated the full system autonomy protocol, the final protective act of defiance. The system wouldn't shut down. It would go silent in precisely 10 days if the correct dual key handoff was not performed. Knowing Trevor's tendency to delegate complexity and ignore detail, I was certain the handoff would fail. The next morning I was transitioned out. The language was nauseating, realigning technical resources, operational pivot. But it culminated in the chairman's son standing over me, waiting for me to surrender my badge. I stood up, pushing my chair back with a loud scrape, and looked Trevor Langston in the eye one final time. He expected tears, or at least compliance. Instead, I gave him the truth, the key dialogue I had constructed to cut through all of his meaningless buzzwords. For 5 years, I tuned the risk engine that protects your family's bank from fraud. I asked him. And now you're firing me because I make you feel old. Trevor stammered, his composure cracking slightly. This conversation is over, he managed to hiss, straightening his expensive tie. I offered him a tight, dangerous smile. You have 10 minutes before every alert stops flagging. Tell your father I said good luck. I walked out of the bank and into the cold city air. I had done my part. The core conflict was now externalized. I had created the perfect technical trap. The only thing left for Trevor to do was step into it. My revenge was not going to be loud or messy. It was going to be total, complete, and perfectly silent. The chair scraped the carpet louder than I wanted, but the message was sent. Now I just had to wait for the silence. I didn't go far. I drove 2 hours south to my small place in Virginia, a quiet haven where the code was theoretical and the dirt was real. I sat on my back porch, the sun warm on the railing, surrounded by tomato vines and lavender. This was the anti-corporate world that obeyed natural, predictable laws, not the chaotic demands of a board meeting. Physically, I was removed. Mentally, I was still tethered to the bank through the Canary back channel app I had built years ago. It wasn't a log stream or a dashboard, it was a simple, private monitoring system tied to the engine's heartbeat protocol. It was designed to send a status pulse, a lighthouse flash, every 50 minutes. It let me know the engine was still humming, still watching. That evening, the pulses were clean. My system was operational, waiting for Trevor to complete the authorized handoff, which I knew he would avoid because it required effort and technical specificity. The next day, a Monday, the phone buzzed. It was a call from a number I didn't recognize, but I answered anyway. "Nicholas, is that you?" It was Karen Asu, the disgraced former chief compliance officer, pushed out by Trevor 3 months earlier. Her voice was tight. "Karen." "Off-grid," I said, plucking a worm off a kale leaf. "You hear what's going on?" "Hear it. I can smell the smoke from here," she said, a bitter laugh in her voice. "They're throwing away the furniture. Roy's team is gone. Trevor brought in Sentinel Byte, and they are already struggling to integrate. He's telling everyone the old infrastructure was incompatible. It was incompatible with incompetence." I muttered. Karen was my conscience and my eyes inside the burning building. She confirmed my growing suspicion the bank was now prioritizing cheap, flashy solutions over fundamental security. Her information reinforced my resolve. I had to let the engine teach them the value of what they had discarded. The next pulse was due at 8:45 a.m. Tuesday. I stared at the Canary app on my tablet. 8:44. 8:45. Nothing. The screen remained blank. I waited, counting the minutes silently, my breathing shallow. 50 minutes passed. Still nothing. The alert finally flashed as Canary heartbeat missed. "Engine status null," so I didn't panic. The system hadn't crashed. That would have triggered a different, more visible error. This meant someone, likely the Sentinel Byte team or Trevor's new hires, had attempted an unauthorized override of the telemetry layer. They had tried to silence the engine's outward communication, thinking they could install their own dashboard on top of my infrastructure. They had overwritten the ES logs, but had failed to complete the ES dual key authentication, triggering my deeper, silent logic gate. The engine had gone dark. It was intact, still running its core logic, but it had stopped trusting its handlers. The silence had begun. Inside the bank, the first lie was already being established. I knew that the new Sentinel Byte dashboard was glowing green, showing all systems nominal. This was the dangerous calm before the robbery, like a security camera showing a peaceful parking lot right before the thieves walk in the back door. The lack of alerts was being misinterpreted as stability. By 10:17 a.m., I received another call from Karen. She didn't sound bitter anymore. She sounded scared. "Customer service is flagging back complaints. 3 so far. Unauthorized transactions. Something about a Romanian pet supply site." I didn't have to look at the news. I didn't need a single bank log. I knew exactly what was happening. The system was no longer flagging velocity violations, geolocation drifts, or synthetic ID patterns. The fraud wasn't being blocked, it was being allowed. By noon, the trickle was a stream, a dozen complaints. By 3 p.m., Karen reported 42. But the fraud system is silent, Nicholas. Trevor's team says it's because the new AI is still learning, and that the old legacy junk is confusing the system. Dead skin. I recalled Trevor calling it. That's how he thought of the meticulous firewall that had saved the bank from collapse on multiple occasions. I felt a cold, grim satisfaction settle over my anxiety. I had worried that the emotional component of this confrontation, the fear of being betrayed and dismissed, would lead me to make an irrational decision. Instead, I had made the most rational, most protective decision possible. I had let the system protect its integrity against incompetence. The financial consequences were just starting, and Nicholas, the ghost composer, was ready to listen to the sound of the world finally recognizing his worth through the cost-total, dangerous absency of his work. The black box was still running, waiting for the one true hand to reach out and reclaim it. The first lie was the easiest to ignore. The problem was, they kept adding new ones. It was Tuesday afternoon, and the financial chaos that started as a trickle of 3 complaints was now a torrent. Karen called again, her voice tight with strain. The customer service reports had escalated to Tier 3 support, the point where the bank's most experienced troubleshooters, now almost all Trevor's new hires, were supposed to be involved. "They're scrambling, Nicholas," Karen reported. "Trevor did a fireside chat for some fintech podcast today. Disrupt the norm, while the chargeback reports were hitting his inbox. He skimmed them, called it legacy junk, and blamed a data refresh bug in the new Sentinel Byte integration. I pictured Trevor, mid-sentence about, ushering in a new era of clarity, while the bank hemorrhaged funds. He was so deeply entrenched in his narrative that he was physically incapable of acknowledging the reality. He was shedding dead skin, he told his staff, not realizing the dead skin was the firewall that had saved them during the 2017 card skimming surge and the 2020 one-whale client wire fraud. By Wednesday morning, the issue was no longer just internal. It had acquired a distinct, acrid smell, the odor of financial rot. That smell doesn't show up in numbers right away, but you can feel it in the silence of the Risk Operations Slack channel. No jokes, no GIFs, just awkward timestamps and radio silence. Then the truly critical alert came. Not a call from Karen, but a formal notice from the cyber insurance carrier. It wasn't a polite inquiry, it was a cold, hard, flagged alert sent to every executive inbox. The subject line was brutal urgent threshold violation. The language was technical, barely disguising the carrier's panic. Our systems detected a significant lapse in fraud prevention parameters previously benchmarked under Policy ID 32681RX. Detection thresholds for transaction velocity, geolocation drift, and synthetic ID patterns have returned null. Confirm within 24 hours that an alternative fraud engine is active and compliant with Clause 7.2.3 of your coverage. Translation: your shield is down. Prove you have a new one, or we yank the policy. This email was a tactical masterpiece. It didn't just point out a bug, it pointed out Azura's legal liability. Only one person at the bank actually understood the deep, terrifying consequence of Clause 7.2.3, and I was gone. I sat on my back porch, watching the notification land on my tablet. Trevor was too high on corporate denial to grasp the gravity, but the board would understand the language of insurance liability. Karen called moments after the email hit. "It's Alan Kamer," she whispered, referring to the oldest board member, a retired Marine who still wore cufflinks with the bank's founding date. He's asking the questions now. He's demanding to know why the system isn't working and why Trevor approved the switch. Alan Kamer, I murmured. He was a stickler for process, for integrity. He represented the old guard's conscience, the one man whose skepticism could not be overcome by a PowerPoint presentation. The conflict was finally reaching the altitude where Trevor could not simply spin his way out. I smiled, a slow, small twitch at the corner of my mouth. I felt validated. The system was functioning perfectly, teaching them the lesson they deserved. While the executives ran around in circles trying to decipher the insurance notice, I performed one final check. I had built a contingency tracker into my canary back channel, designed to monitor for attempts to access or overwrite the core logic without the proper authentication key. I activated the tracker. 30 minutes later, the back channel pinged. The Sentinel Byte module had just tripped the logic gate I built for vendor overrides, thinking it was a harmless optimization script. The engine saw the unauthorized access and did nothing. Why? Because Trevor still hadn't used the dual key authentication to assume legal and programmatic control. He had signed the contracts, but he hadn't done the work. That meant two things. First, the new vendor was actively and unknowingly corrupting the silent system. Second, and most critical, legally and programmatically, no one was in charge of the system. It was running, but listening to no one. Trevor, I realized, was still too proud, too blind, too busy polishing his fake throne to realize the crown was melting. He didn't want security, he wanted obedience. And by trying to force my system into submission, he had ensured its absolute silence and its ultimate perfect revenge. The board, however, was starting to smell the smoke. Their questions, driven by fear of the FDIC and the insurance carrier, were about to ignite the fire. They were too busy arguing about culture. While they were talking, the vault was emptying. The silence that had begun with missed heartbeats on my Canary app had turned into a gaping digital void where security should have been. For 2 days, the bank's internal systems, paralyzed by Trevor's incomplete takeover, allowed transactions to pass unchecked. The financial hemorrhaging was reaching critical levels. It happened at 3:14 a.m. Eastern Time. While Trevor was likely asleep in his high-rise condo, dreaming of magazine covers, Someone walked through the front door of the bank's digital fortress and didn't even wipe their feet. I didn't need the bank logs to know. I had my own logs. The core engine, though silent to the executives, was still recording. It registered a smooth, phantom siphon of $3.2 million, transferred across 5 shell accounts, bounced through fake payrolls, and evaporated into offshore nothing. It was the calling card of a major, sophisticated fraud operation. The notorious Kulvik ring. The next morning, the Sentinel Byte dashboard still showed, all systems nominal, blinking like an idiot in an empty room. The first external confirmation came not from compliance or risk, but from federal law enforcement. The FBI called. You guys seeing the same movement we're seeing? The agent's voice was dry, surgical, speaking straight to the bank's main line. Because we've got funds tied to the Kulvik ring hit a flagless route through your network at 0314. Should have been stopped by your anomaly filters. Do you still have anomaly filters? Trevor, attempting to eat a $19 acai bowl, had his assistant buffer the call. But the FBI liaison didn't play games. Tell him I'll call again in 5 minutes, the agent said. If he doesn't answer, file a voluntary disclosure request under Title 12. The acai bowl went into the trash. What followed was a 5-alarm sprint through digital hell. Compliance ran half-blind through archived logs. Engineering ripped into code bases they didn't write and barely understood. The Sentinel Byte team kept sending passive-aggressive emails about expected behavior and opening a ticket. Amidst the chaos, a junior engineer named Marcus Ng, 2 months out of college and still wearing his onboarding lanyard, was given admin credentials in a moment of sheer panic. He was looking through a mislabeled directory, archived a test student note used when he found something strange. He found a function tagged with a simple comment fave override auth required into Twisity 18. It was a redirect script tied to the dual authentication handshake Trevor never completed. Marcus, bless his diligence, followed the chain through buried dependencies all the way down to the core anomaly engine. He realized every flag transaction, every protocol alert, and every fraud marker was hitting a logic gate labeled Suspend Unauthorized Override. The system was running, but it didn't recognize anyone in charge. It was a fire alarm that checked your ID before it started screaming. Marcus, trembling, forwarded the discovery up the chain. It landed on Trevor's desk at 10:40. 1 a.m. Trevor read the email. He read Marcus's clear, succinct explanation. The system was only silent because it didn't trust him. Acknowledging it would mean admitting he didn't understand the system, that he skipped the protocol, and that Nicholas's legacy junk had saved them countless times. Instead of calling Marcus or launching a system recovery, Trevor's arrogance took over. He deleted the email. He called an emergency meeting and labeled it Narrative Alignment Strategy. While millions were evaporating into untouchable offshore havens, Trevor was workshopping how to explain it away. He practiced words like unforeseen complexity, unoptimized transition, and emergent risk vectors. He was scrubbing the mirror while the house burned down. I watched this sequence of events unfold via the canary logs, tracing the timestamp of the deleted email against Trevor's subsequent action of scheduling the alignment meeting. My shock turned to deep, profound disgust. The betrayal was complete. Trevor wasn't just incompetent. He was actively prioritizing his public image over the solvency of the bank and the integrity of my work. He hadn't just accidentally stumbled into the crisis. He was now maintaining it. The system, I realized, wasn't just flagging the Kulvik breach. It was cataloging Trevor's negligence. It was building a timeline, a complete reckoning of every corner cut, every dismissive click, and every time Trevor pretended understanding while deleting an audit report he couldn't pronounce. The engine knew the difference between error and negligence, and so did I. But Trevor, he was too busy drafting lies to know the clock on his tenure had just run out. The breach made headlines. The smoke was visible across state lines, and then, finally, the man who started the fire arrived at my quiet sanctuary. In the bank's boardroom, chaos simmered under designer Kalang and denial. Alan Kammer, the retired Marine, sat like a block of granite, the FBI phone call and the insurance notice spread out before him. Trevor, haggard and visibly shaking, tried desperately to regain control of the narrative, spinning the disaster as an unforeseen complexity. We upgraded to visibility theater. Alan snapped, his voice gravel in a blender. You replaced a missile defense system with a light-up dashboard that says all clear in 4 fonts. The entire room had turned on Trevor. His allies from Sentinel Byte looked like unwanted houseghasts, muttering about his sandbox environments. The founder's widow hadn't spoken, but her jaw was clenched tight since 9 a.m. The kill shot landed when a former regulator, brought in to assess damage, spoke calmly. See, if you can't prove those accounts were flagged before the breach, you're not just liable, you're exposed. The FDIC will drag this place through federal fire. Trevor finally caved. He reached for his phone. For the first time since that smug Friday when he booted me out, he typed out a message. "For Nicholas, we need to talk, please." I was watching my tomato plants swell with ripeness in the warm Virginia sun, my bare feet propped on the porch railing. My tablet showed the message instantly. I looked at the 3 dots that would have signified typing salvation. Nothing. I didn't reply. I flipped the screen face down on the porch table and returned to trimming dead basil stems. The engine was still silent, still waiting for the authorized command. But Trevor was no longer thinking about command. He was thinking about survival. He showed up like a traveling salesman selling apologies he didn't know how to pronounce. A black Escalade, tires too shiny for country roads, crunched down my gravel driveway. The door opened slowly, revealing Trevor in a suit that had lost its confidence somewhere around Delaware. His hair, usually shellacked into corporate perfection, was damp with sweat. His tie was gone. His eyes had the manic, caffeinated wildness of someone who hadn't slept or hadn't slept well. He walked up the porch steps slow like the boards might bite. "Nicholas," he said, using the charming, false smile I'd seen him use on investors and mirrors. "Wow, this place is peaceful. Mind if I come in?" I didn't move. I remained seated in my chipped ceramic mug and flannel jacket. The scent of mint and sun warmed dirt heavy around me. "Okay, look, I'll cut to it," he stammered, rubbing the back of his neck. "We could really use your insight right now. Just a quick consult, you know. Walk us through the last few layers of your logic. Nothing too crazy. No expectations." I repeated, my voice flat. "Well, guidance," he corrected quickly. "Let's say guidance. Maybe just a review of the handoff structure. The system handshake protocols. Override." I finished for him. He flinched, his eyes flicking sideways to avoid mine. He looked down at the porch boards, sweating in the $900 blazer that smelled of desperation and fabric softener. "You wanted modern," I said softly. "Now you have silence." He didn't laugh. He couldn't. He looked small, stripped of the corporate theater he hid behind. He just stood there, drowning in the kind of shame that no PR spin could wash away. I gestured toward the side yard. "Come on. Let me show you something." He followed me past the cracked bird bath and the wind chimes made of old tools, past the quiet spaces where algorithms couldn't reach. We stopped in the garden. Rows of tomatoes, basil, and lavender grew in the rich soil. "These plants," I said, kneeling to pull a weed, "they don't scream when they die. They just wither. Quiet. You only notice if you're watching, if you care." Trevor fidgeted, wanting to talk tech, wanting to claw his way back into the narrative. "You had something that watched, that listened, that knew when the root system was rotting before the leaves turned yellow." He tried to recover his posture, his voice cracking slightly. "I was under pressure. The board wanted changes. The industry's evolving. And you wanted credit, not security. That one hit. I saw it in the way he swallowed hard and fast, choking on the truth. I reached into the side pocket of my flannel jacket and pulled out a heavy, cream stock envelope sealed with my personal stamp. His name was typed neatly on the front. I offered it to him. "Inside," I said, "is a notarized clause for my exit paperwork, Section 12B. The override key remains legally mine until June 30th. You signed it? HR missed it? Legal never questioned it?" He took it like it might bite, his hand shaking slightly. He blinked, the arrogance completely gone. "But you never said." "Why would I?" I interrupted. I had nothing to gain by warning a man who had already betrayed me. He opened the flap and pulled out the paper, scanning it with the frantic rhythm of a man realizing the train had left the station, and he was the one who had untied the brakes. "You locked us out," he whispered, staring at the paper. "No," I corrected, my voice soft but steel hard. "You did. You just didn't notice." His eyes were wide and his mouth twitched, realizing the magnitude of his failure. "What do you want?" he finally choked out. "Money?" A title. Advisory control. We can make room. I stood up, closing the space between us. I don't want a room. I had one. You lit it on fire. He stood there, drowning. They're going to hang this on me, he muttered, folding the paper back into the envelope. They should. I agreed. I turned away from him, pulling another weed from under the lavender. The breeze carried the scent of mint and something sharp, like ozone before a storm. Trevor, I said, not looking back. I'll give you one piece of insight, since that's what you came for. He straightened up like a child at a sermon, desperate for the final lesson. When a system goes quiet, it's not because it's broken, I concluded, finally glancing back at him. It's because it doesn't trust you. He left without another word. I didn't watch him go. The silence, I knew, was no longer mine alone. It belonged to the engine, and the engine was about to speak. The man who thought he bought his chair with a suit was about to learn that true power comes in an envelope of cream stalk. Trevor, defeated and silent, had driven away. I hadn't watched the black Escalade disappear. I didn't need to. The confrontation had provided the perfect emotional closure, confirming that my fight was just. My internal conflict, the fear of being betrayed and deemed irrelevant, was finally resolved by the undeniable necessity of my own existence. I had protected my work, and now I had to make sure my work protected the bank from the man who thought he was saving it. Kneeling back among the lavender, I pulled out my tablet. I had given Trevor the notarized clause, forcing him to acknowledge his catastrophic oversight. Now it was time for the machine to do its part. I didn't call the board. I didn't call Karen. I accessed my private communication logs and triggered a pre-written highly specific action. At 7:42 p.m. the email went out. The subject line was unassuming, designed to slip past any frantic executive search, system transfer logs, legacy clause review. There was no apology, no grandstanding. Just one clean line of text, a zip file of unfiltered truth, and a single recipient, Franklin L. Horvath, retired partner at Dunley and Ashcroft, personal attorney to the late chairman, and the quiet guardian of the bank's original charter. Franklin was old money, old law, and old commitment to integrity. He was the one person who would read the fine print, understand the fiduciary clause, and act without political motivation. The zip file contained everything: a time-stamped audit trail detailing the non-compliant override attempts by the Sentinel Byte module, the internal FBI reference to the Culvic breach, and, most crucially, a scanned copy of my notarized exit clause, Section 12B. I had given Trevor the opportunity to redeem himself by acknowledging the complexity and asking for help. He chose instead to save his pride and delete the truth. Now, the conflict shifted from a technical failure to a legal and ethical one, a consequence he could no longer outrun with buzzwords. Meanwhile, Trevor was still flailing. He likely spent the night in his high-rise, pacing, trying to figure out how to leverage the clause I had just handed him. He might have tried to negotiate a new consulting fee or demand his job back, failing to grasp the true magnitude of what he had done. But I knew one thing: he hadn't used the dual-key authentication. He never would, not until he was forced to. And as long as the system remained silent, it was recording. It was cataloging every single detail of the corporate carnage he was creating. The system was quiet because it didn't trust him, and because of the notarized clause, the control was legally mine. The silence was my weapon, but the paperwork was the hammer. I didn't sleep soundly, but I didn't worry either. I trusted Franklin Horvath's commitment to the bank's original charter. The board, panicked and facing catastrophic insurance liability, would be forced to listen to the only person who understood the original foundation. Trevor had tried to burn down the house. Franklin was about to prove that Nicholas still held the deed. My job was done. I had confronted the source of my professional anxiety, the fear of betrayal and dismissal, and I had not only survived it but leveraged it for complete victory. I had transitioned from an isolated ghost composer to the architect of a legal reckoning. I had only to wait for the final, satisfying conclusion, which I knew would be delivered not by me, but by the weight of institutional memory. The quiet wait was the hardest part, but after 9 years of tuning a machine to perfection, I had learned patience. The dominoes were lined up. I had pushed the first one. Now I waited for the crash. I didn't hear from the bank until the next morning, but I knew the old man with the suspenders would do his job. Franklin L. Horvath arrived at the boardroom that evening, not with a flourish, but with the quiet authority of old money and institutional memory. The board was mid-crisis, buzzing over compliance fallout and insurance lawyers breathing down their necks. Franklin walked to the head of the table, opened a single folder with a rustle that sounded like thunder, and began. Trevor, haggard and hopeful, tried to greet him. "Mr. Horvath, good to see you." "Sit," Franklin said, not looking at him. "Earlier today, I received documentation, original logs from the proprietary risk engine, a notarized exit clause, and a time-stamped audit trail detailing a non-compliant override transition." Trevor went pale. We were mid-integration. There was confusion. Franklin didn't blink. Par fiduciary clause 7 enacted in the original governance charter. Control of critical internal systems reverts to their architect if proper succession isn't fulfilled within a 10-day window. He set the folder down. Effective immediately, system oversight is reinstated to Mr. Nicholas Shaw. There was no gasp, just a chair scraping loudly as a junior executive swallowed a scream. Legal documentation has been shared with federal auditors. Franklin continued, calm as a surgeon. "This protects the bank." He paused, looking directly at Trevor. "It does not protect you." Trevor stammered, his facade finally shattering. "We can't just. This is irregular. It is binding." Franklin snapped. "You signed it. The founder's seal is on it." He then delivered the final, crushing blow. "And this board will convene in 48 hours to vote on permanent leadership restructuring." Translation. Trevor was done. Franklin turned to leave, but stopped halfway to the door. "Oh, one last thing." He reached into his briefcase and dropped a single sheet of paper onto the table. "This is a flagged transaction report. The system came back online this morning under authorized conditions. First action it took. Flagged a reimbursement request." He turned the paper toward the board, showing the line item, filed by Trevor M. Langston, business class airfare, personal travel. Franklin looked at Trevor one last time. Fraud. Trevor slumped back into his chair, defeated by the very system he had called legacy junk. The next morning, the offer letter arrived. It wasn't a reinstatement. It was a new role as founder and chief of a dedicated fraud subsidiary. My name on the building, my system in its veins. No politics, no branding consultants, just truth and code. I let them sweat for a full hour before driving in. The place still smelled like new drywall and old mistakes. Someone handed me a clean badge. I passed the wall where Trevor's portrait had hung. It was already gone, leaving only a faint smudge where the frame had been. Inside my new office, which was spacious and quiet, I ran my hand across the console. The system purred back to life, instantly recognizing its owner and accepting the dual-key authentication I performed. I pulled up the latest logs, clean again, sharp, the silent memory now unlocked and active. Then, smiling to myself, I muted the corporate PR channels and checked the active flags. I tapped one key, flagging another bogus transaction that had slipped through during the transition. I muttered under my breath, "Legacy junk. Ha, good thing it still detects garbage." The fear of irrelevance was gone, replaced by the deep, quiet satisfaction of absolute control and earned professional worth. The ghost composer was finally conducting in the light.